to the files that we were working with, you'll notice we have this RTF file. And so if we open that RTF file and we take a look at it, you'll notice that it's just got a small collection of content. And so this is going to be, if we look at this content in a text file, then it just shows up like this. And the idea of this is that whatever this content is, we are going to put into our HTML, and then we're going to practice using HTML to mark up content, which is going to get us practice with what HTML5's purpose is and goal, which is that the tags that we use are there to describe what the content is, so that the browser knows what it's supposed to be, and then can output that to the visual browser, to a screen reader, to the user agent style sheet that sets up the default look, to a style sheet that you add later, where you are using the hooks in the markup, describing the content to understand what this content is, and then make it look like it's supposed to. So we're just going to grab all of this, and right now we're just going to stick this right here in the body. And at this point, it's a whole bunch of ugly stuff, and we're going to sort of take a look at it one at a time and dig our way through this and start to make it work. I'm going to just sort of push a little bit of this down out of sight for now, because I want to just work with this stuff right now so that we can just sort of think about this and then come at the rest of it later. So the first thing we're going to do with this is we are going to start by just describing the content itself. So if you were to look back at that RTF file that we had before, you'll see we've got a heading, we've got a paragraph with a bolded chunk, we've got a heading that's smaller than the first heading, we've got a couple things that are saying that they're links, we've got a bigger heading, and we go through there. So what that content seems to look like is what we're going to describe here. So if this is the biggest heading, then that would suggest that this would be marked up with a H1 element, because H1 means heading level 1, or highest in the hierarchy. On the other hand, this element is a paragraph, and so a paragraph element would be the accurate one for that. Whereas this down here, this navigation, there's a couple ways you could have interpreted that in the RTF file. You could look at this and say, this is probably a heading labeling the navigation section. Or you can say, you know what, that's probably just descriptive of what this purpose is, in which case let's replace that with a nav tag. Because again, you think about sort of HTML5, and its goal is to be semantic. And so that means we're describing things based on their purpose and type and content type. And so in this case, because these are navigation elements, we will put them inside a navigation tag. We can do the same thing up here also. This heading and first description and navigation is part of a portion of the site that would be, if we were looking at this as a print document, we would probably think of as the header of the web of the page. And so with that page convention continuing in our minds, we open and close the container, calling all this the header stuff, and we see that as being sort of elements in here, children of. One thing to note is tags that are block level will sort of have to be their own thing, but we can have a tag like this where all of this is a paragraph there, but there's a particular element within that paragraph that is different. And we can mark that up to highlight it and describe it as being a different thing. And in the RTF file, we saw that that was bold. And the way that we do that with HTML5 is with a strong tag, which is different from what we used to use in HTML3 and HTML4 and other ones where we would often use the B tag. And so the reason why we use strong is because there's the philosophy that we're working with is that with HTML is for description and CSS is for style and visual. And so that means that we try not to apply things to the HTML that would be considered style. And so this content could be bold, it could be something else, but one way or the other, it's sort of like stronger in hierarchy than the surrounding paragraph, and that will default to bold by the user agent style sheet. But if you wanted to change what strong text was in your CSS, you could do so. And it's just trying to do that in a way that's a little bit more semantically specific. So that strong is there. So the last thing we want to look at right now is we've got this to the kittens and the puppies, and right now this is talking about taking it to different sections. We're going to show you a little bit about how that works. Also, by the way, I'm going to mess with things. I'm going to try and show you something a little bit more advanced with the puppies link in a little while, but we're going to start with adding a link to our kittens here. And so the way that that generally would work is we have a tag, and that tag is an anchor tag. And it has, all anchor tags that you use will generally have an attribute which is an href attribute. And so there's our equals, there's our commas, or sorry, quotation marks, and inside that is usually the thing that we're linking to. You can link, and then what will happen is you close that opening tag, and then you have your closing anchor tag. And so the stuff that's inside the anchor tag will be an interactable that when you're using the browser, you can click on, and then it will go to whatever is the value inside this href attribute. And that can be to a different page inside your website. It can be a different website entirely, or it can be a different location in the page that you're on. And so what we're going to do for this first one is we're going to give it a location of the page that we're on. In this case, we're going to tell it to go to kittens. What this is actually saying is go to the tag with the ID, that's this £, the identifier of kittens, which doesn't exist right now. So if you clicked on it, nothing would happen. But once we make that, that will function as intended. We're going to do that with our puppies as well. But for now, I'm not going to put anything in here. I'm just going to put a £, that does nothing, just so that it still looks like it's clickable. But we're going to do something different with this in a little while. But this is where we're going to start. So based on what we've got there, that's going to sort of help us out, and that's going to be the start of our website. And if I'm just going to save this, I'm going to not save this as default template because I don't want to ruin my template. I'm going to go to Save As, and in the main space, as before, I'm going to save this, and because this is the first page that I want to load when the website opens, I'm going to name this index.html. And if we were to go to our file browser, and we now see that there, if we were to double click this and load it in our browser, you'll see we've got this My Most Hideous page ever, we've got a paragraph, we've got these two little links, and then we've got a bunch of random crap. That's because I copy and pasted everything else in there. Notice, by the way, that stuff is immediately right underneath the navigation, even though in this file it's tabbed way down there. And that's because these line spaces, the browser doesn't care about those stuff. That's just there for me to be able to see it more clearly. Otherwise, unless I tell it to have space, which I will do in the CSS, not in the HTML, that stuff won't be there. And so the spacing that you do see here is actually CSS spacing, but it's applied by default by the browser. So the browser by default says to itself, anything that's in H1 should have a certain amount of space. And so this is one of the reasons why we don't try and add manual space in the in the HTML, is because if we have manual space built into the HTML, then the way that the CSS is giving instructions will create unpredictable results, which will make all of us unhappy. So let's look back at some of the rest of the stuff we hear. So the next thing to think about is this whole chunk here is a section of content. And so when we're talking about sort of like dealing with semantic HTML, and we're not just talking about just how we describe the content, but we're describing how the content is organized. So in this case, that means that I have this section tag, and then I might elsewhere have that section closing, and then all of this stuff will start to go in here. One of the first things that you should know about section tags is that for them to be considered valid as HTML, they are assumed to need an H2 that is that describes the topic of the section. So if you imagine that this is a newspaper, then you have a situation like this where the newspaper will have a series of articles, and in those articles they might have multiple sections of content. So in this case, if we assume that this page is an article about kittens, or about cats, this first element is the kittens section of that, which has a topic of how cute kittens are. We can also, as I mentioned, we can create links that point things to entirely different pages or different websites. And so if I wanted you to see how you can link to a separate location out on the internet, I want you to see how that would work. And so we're going to do an anchor tag again, and we're going to do the href as always. Probably good if I spelled it right and added all the other things. And in this case, the location we're going to put this and send this is we're going to say it's going to go to http://placekitten.com, because that's what this says down here. I'm going to close that. Whoops. I'm going to make sure the opening of the anchor tag is done, and then we're going to close the tag there. And so this will make all of the H2 here clickable, and it will take us to a different website, and that will make that heading also a link that will take us somewhere else. And the next thing it says here is place kitten photo, and then it says it's a bundle of cute cuddly death. So we've got two things there. We've got a caption and we've got an image. So the first thing I want to show you is how we can link an image in here. And as before, that's going to happen with a tag. In this case, it's an image tag. And as with the meta tags above, the image tag is sort of self-closing, is what's sometimes described, because everything that the image tag needs is going to be described in its attributes, which in this case is going to start with src, which is the source attribute, which will have a value which will correspond to the location of the image. And so if we go back to the file browser, we see we have an img directory. And inside that img directory, we've got a few different pictures, and the picture that I matter about the kitten is this one, which is labeled plotting-kitten.jpg. So that's our file name. So to put that, oops, wrong thing. To put that in here, that means we have to tell it to go to, plotting-kitten.jpg. And if I were to close this tag and just do that and save this, it's not going to work. I'm just warning you now, because it will try and find this, but it will fail, because what this is currently saying is, hey, HTML file, in the same spot as you, look for this file. And it won't find it because that's not where this file is. This file is in the image directory. And so what I need to write is, in img directory, look for plottingkitten.jpg. The other thing that I want to do in here with the attributes is I want to add a few other attributes. One of the most important is the alt attribute, because the alt attribute is part of how we establish our accessibility. And an alt tag that we might have here should then describe the image, which in this case is a young black kitten sitting on a blanket plotting the death of birds, because that's what's going on in that photo. And then the last attributes that we can put in here are, we can establish the width and we can establish the height of the image. So I know I said before that we don't do styling in HTML, we do description. And so if I've got a width and height property in my image, that means that I'm describing the width and height. I am not setting the width and height. And so what I would describe in this width and height is the width and height of the image itself. And the image has a fixed width and height, because however much our website is meant to be responsive and use relative units, the image in the end has a maximum size. It's 480 pixels wide and it's 640 pixels tall. And if at any point the browser tried to make it larger than that, the image quality would degrade and it would become pixelated. And so we want to make sure that the browser knows the maximum size so it doesn't mess with that. So 480 wide, 640 tall. And life works a little bit easier for us and hopefully works out well. And just to make sure that that's working, let's save it again. And let's go back to our page and reload, and boom, we have a cat. And notice we also have this link. And if I were to click that link, it would take you somewhere. But there's our kitten. So another thing to note is we've got this caption here. So I put the image on its own here because I wanted you to see that an image tag on its own loads fine, totally valid. This is fine. Anytime you have an image in your website, if you put an image tag, you're generally totally okay. In the event that you want to have a line of text related to that image that is specifically, again, is meant to be with the image, oftentimes is descriptive of the image, that is a caption. And if you have a captioned image, as any of you who have written an academic paper knows, that an image with a caption in a document becomes a figure. And so to make that described semantically and make it valid, if you were to validate your HTML, that means that if you have a caption in a figure, you should probably have it inside a figure tag. Also, I wrote the caption tag wrong. There is probably a caption tag out there that's a valid tag, but since this is a caption for an image in a figure, it's actually written as fig caption. My bad, I should have done that right the first time. And we should get rid of that because that we already have these instructions. We did all these things. So what are some last things that are in our website here? We've got a list. One thing to note is this here is an ordered list, and that is different from an unordered list. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to paste that under there. I should probably have cut that instead of copied it. Let's just get all of this stuff in there. Put it in there where it's supposed to go. And so with this stuff, I'm actually going to rip off these numbers because the numbers are actually not relevant. I can do this without. That was just there to warn me that this was a list and what kind of list it was. So to do this all right, these are list objects, regardless of whether or not they're unordered lists or ordered lists that these things are part of. These items are list items. So let's put li on them all. And then how they should look is governed by their parent. And in this case, their parent is an OL, which is an ordered list, which by default will give it numbers so that it describes the order of the elements inside. And then below that, we have a paragraph. And so that is just in a paragraph tag as usual, which then ends below that. And there's one last thing in this one. If we go back to our RTF file, and we see here, no, there's nothing else. Okay, it's just itself. So that's just a paragraph, and that's cool. So I'm going to lie now. I'm not going to do what the next step of this is, and I'm going to do something a little bit different so I can show you another couple things. So one thing I want to show you right now is we had this navigation. It says to the kittens, and then we had a section that's all about kittens. So if we want to make this work, that means we need to tell the browser where the kitten section is. And right now there's nothing to really label that. Like you and I reading this know, okay, that looks like it's about a kitten, but the browser's blind and it doesn't know what that means. And so for that ID, we have to actually apply that. So the section tag, we can add an attribute, and a particular attribute that you'll see used fairly frequently is the ID attribute, and there's also the class attribute, and both of these allow us to add unique identifiers to specific HTML elements or groups of HTML elements in the case of class. And with the ID here, we're going to do this here, and we're going to say kittens. And so one thing to note with IDs is you can only ever have one of one particular named ID. So the ID of kittens can only be ever applied once on this page, and it can only be applied to this item that I've just tagged with the ID of kittens. I can have other IDs on the page, but those IDs cannot be kittens. So now with that there, what will happen is if I save this and we go back to our browser and reload, now we see all of our content there. If I now click onto the kittens, you'll notice it bounces down. So it's gone to the target, which is the start of the section, which is invisible, like just a little invisible line right above that link, and that takes us to our kitten section. And so that allows us to navigate around within the page by clicking on some of our links. And we can see how we can start to extend that. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to make another section. And you can put anything you want in this, but I'm going to put in here an ID, and that's going to be ID jealousy. And I'm going to put in an H2, same as we did before, same kind of structure. And again, this H2 is going to drive the topic, and so this topic heading will be why are kittens jealous of cups? And so and then I'm repeating things that I've already showed you because I want to reinforce how this works so that you can follow along, and we're going to go faster. I'm not going to necessarily narrate all of this through, but you're going to see how a lot of the same techniques I was using before are how we work through the rest of it. And so if we go back to our files, one of the things you'll notice is I've got this one called jealouscat.jpg, and that one has width and height of 800 wide, 600 tall. So we go in as we did before, and we have our image tag, source, equals location img slash I hope I got that right, the alt tag, such as that. And then we have our width equals, we have our height equals, and I believe I said it was 800 wide and 600 tall. And let's go and see whether I got it right. So if I got this file name right, we're good. And if I got the file name wrong, we're not good. Looks like I got the file name wrong. But notice what we have. We have this little thing that's marking that the image is broken. And we've got this text. And this text is the alt text that I just wrote in there. And so this is what a browser reads when it can't see the image, and what the browser reads because browsers, like web crawlers, can't read the image. They read the alt text. A screen reader would also read the alt text. So if someone is using a screen reader because they're blind and they're still navigating your web page, this is what will describe it. And so you maintain accessibility and inclusivity with people with different abilities or with visual impairments or other situations so that they can still access content and become a part of your audience. But for now, let's go see what I did wrong. So jealous-cat, and what did I write? I wrote jealous-kitten. Silly me. So with that file rewritten, and we have the cat. And then just for the fun of it, we're going to go back to our HTML, and I'm just going to copy and paste this lorem ipsum. I'll just copy and paste the whole tag. And we're going to make one more section. And we're going to give this one an ID of evil. Actually, no, we're going to give this an ID of death. And we have an H2. Why are cats lurking death? And we're going to do this again. So there's our fake paragraph. And then in between, we're going to have an image. We're going to have our alt text, which, trust me, is and so let's go back to our directory, and we see in there, we see Cat of Doom. Cat of Doom is 640 by 866. Note, by the way, the file name, JPEG, that's totally a valid file name. JPG is just JPEG, and JPEG is a JPEG, but you got to get the file name right. If you typo it, it's not going to work for you. So source is image directory cat-of-doom.jpeg, and then width, height, and I can't remember it already, 640 by 866. Let's save it. Let's go check out our web page. Coming along. So last couple things to do up here. Let's really get our section thing running. So let's go back to our nav, and we're going to say save that and head back one more time, and now we can go down there. Cool. Go there. Cool. And we can move around, and then this still goes nowhere. So now that's the last thing I want to teach you, because for some reason in these tutorials, when they were originally written by myself and others, we forgot one thing. We showed you guys how to get somewhere within pages. We showed you guys how to get to a completely different website, but we didn't show you how to get to another HTML page. So that's what I'm going to make now. And to start that, what we're going to do is we're going to go to File, we're going to open our default template. And then we're immediately going to change this to and I'm going to go to File, Save As, and index.html is what I used for the HTML file that I wanted the browser to open automatically. Because when I type in the web address, Chrome and any other web browser will look for an index.html and it will open that first. But anything else inside your page that is that you're linking to from index.html or from anywhere else needs its own descriptive file name. So in this case, we're going to call this and then we go back to our index.html, and in here, instead of this, we just write the file name. And you'll notice I didn't have to write like img or anything else. I didn't have to give it a directory because the puppies page HTML file is in the same location as index.html, and therefore it is saying, in the directory you're currently in, look for this thing. One last thing I'm going to do. We're going to go, and I'm going to go just for now, I'm going to write home, and we're going to save that. So the fun thing with web pages is, HTML pages in particular, is they can be sort of quite modular. So in the case of this, we might have a site that is sort of like the header is the same on every page, with the exception of like certain little bits of this kind of content. And so for one thing, this is I'm going to change this because this is wrong. Let's go to this and say, and then I'm going to take this whole header and nav, and I'm going to go over to puppies page, and we're going to go to our body, and we're going to just drop that in there. And then we're just going to make some slight alterations where the content matters. And then here in home, we're going to make this index.html. And then the puppies page, we're going to just get that so it doesn't go anywhere. And then beneath that, we're going to go back to our RTF file, and let's get the puppies info in here. So again, as before, section, ID equals, and did I remember to copy and paste? Yes, I did. Okay. And then we just do the same thing we always do. H2 gives us that. This heading, I think, is probably an H3. Let's just go back to the RTF and look at it. Whoops, where am I going? Yeah, so we've got an italic that's smaller, so that's still a heading. And then we've got the photo, and we've got the other stuff. So that means H3. But then also, like with the strong before, M for emphasis, which we typically use for italics, but you can change it to be something else. And as before, what have I provided for you? It says acquire a photo, but I've got this guy. And he's not the size that that graphic said, but who cares? He's 800 by 727, whatever. Narcos-duck. So. And we get our width, and we get our height, and we go back to the file and make sure we write 800 wide, 727 tall. And then beneath that we have a paragraph. And beneath that we have list items. And again, we don't need these. Let's just replace them. And then to tell it what kind of list it is, this time it's an unordered list. Get our nesting all looking nice. Save it. And then the last thing we're going to do, of course, is we're going to change up a little bit of the navigation because these two don't make sense. There is a thing you could do with that, but I'm going to ignore it for now. And then I'm going to replace this puppies are cuter one with save that. And now we should be able to go back to here, reload this. We've still got all our stuff. But now if I go, you see a new page, different stuff on it. Home will take us back. And that's all the stuff we want. And hopefully all that works for you guys. So that's the whole thing. That's HTML. There's lots of other tags. You can go to HTML5 Doctor. You can go to the Mozilla Developers Network. You can go to W3 Schools. You can go to lots of places to learn what all the accessible HTML5 tags are, the types of things that you can describe in the content. But in most cases, the structure and system and conventions that we were showing you there will be the ones that go through. And what, for those of you who are finding this because you're heading towards IAT235, the instructions we're going to ask you to do in the lab this week are basically this, is that we want you to take the content that you know you're going to need and the layout things in terms of whether there's a section of content, whether there's an aside, a header, a footer, and mark that up so that the content is described in the HTML as best you can, and that you aren't trying to then insert layout and other information into it.